none. The lynx and the wolf and the fox starve. There are no fur bearers in the traps. The trapper faces the blizzard and the cold to find empty deadfalls day after day, and however skillfully they may hunt, there is no game for his gun. What would he do but starve, if it were not for the fur trader and the post, where there is flour, a little food to help John the Trapper through the winter? The people about us are not thin in the waist. Josephine has made a little oasis of plenty where John the Trapper is safe in good years and bad. That is why I buy fur." The giant's eyes were flushed with enthusiasm again. He pushed the cigars across the table to Philip, and one of his fists was knotted. "She wants me to publish a lot of these things," he went on. "She says that they are facts which would interest the whole world. Perhaps that is so. Fur is gotten with hardship and danger and suffering. It may be there are not many people who know that up here at the top end of the world there is a country of forest and stream 20 times as large as the state of Ohio, and in which the population per square mile is less than that of the great African desert. And it's all because everyone must live off the game. Everything goes back to that. Let something happen, some little thing, a migration of game, a case of measles. The Indians will die if there were not white men near to help them. That's why Josephine makes me buy fur." He pointed to the wall behind Philip. Over the door through which they had just come hung a huge, old-fashioned flintlock 6 feet in length. There was something like the snarl of an animal in John Adare's voice when he spoke again. "That's the tool of the Northland," he said. "That is the only tool John the Trapper knows. All he can know in a land where even the trees are stunted and there are no plows. His clothes and the blankets he weaves of twisted strips of rabbit fur are adapted to the cold. He is a master of the canoe and the most skillful trapper in the world, but in all else he must be looked after like a child. He is still largely one of God's men, this John the Trapper. He hasn't any measurements of value. He doesn't know what the dollar means. He measures his wealth in skins. And when he trades, the basis for whatever mental calculations he may make is in the form of lead bullets taken from one tin pan and transferred to another. He doesn't keep track of figures. He trusts alone to the white man's word, and only those who understand him, who have dealt with him for years, can be trusted not to take advantage of his faith. That's why I buy fur, to give John his chance to live." Adare laughed and ran a hand through his shaggy hair as if rousing himself from thought of a relentless struggle. "But this isn't working on my foxes, is it? On second thought, I think I shall postpone that until tomorrow, Philip. I have promised Miriam that I will have Metoosin trim my hair and beard before dinner. Shall I send him to you?" "A haircut would be a treat," said Philip, rising. He was surprised at the sudden change in the other's mood, but he was not sorry Adare had given him the opportunity to go. He had planned to say other things to Josephine that morning if they had not been interrupted, and he did not believe that she would be long with her mother. In this, however, he was doomed to disappointment. When he returned to his room he found that Josephine had not forgotten the conditions of his wardrobe, and he guessed immediately why she had surprised them all by rising so early. On his bed were spread several changes of shirts and underwear, a pair of new corduroy trousers, a pair of caribou skin leggings, and moccasins. In a box were a dozen linen handkerchiefs and a number of ties for the blue-gray soft shirts Josephine had chosen for him. He was not much ahead of Metoosin, who came in a few minutes later and clipped his hair. When this was done, and he had clad himself in his new raiment, he looked at himself in the mirror. Josephine had shown splendid judgment. Everything fitted him. For an hour he listened for footsteps in the hall, and occasionally looked out of the window. He wondered if Josephine had seen the small round hole with its myriad of outshooting cracks where the bullet had pierced the glass. He made up his mind that she had not, for no one could mistake it, and she would have surely spoken to him of it. He found that the hole was so high up on the pane that he could draw the curtain over it without shutting out much light. He did this. Later he went outside and found that the dogs regarded him with certain signs of friendship. In him was a growing presentiment that something had happened to Jean. He was sure that Croisset had taken up the trail of the man who had shot at him after they had separated at the gravesides. He was equally certain that the chase would be short. Jean was quick. Dogs and sledge would be an impediment for the other in the darkness of the night. Before this, hours ago, they must have met. If Jean had come out of that meeting unharmed, it was time for him to be showing up at Adare House. Still greater perturbation filled Philip's mind when he recalled the unpleasant skill of the mysterious forest man's fighting. He had been more than his equal in swiftness and trickery. He was certainly Jean's. Should he make some excuse and follow Jean's trail? He asked himself this question a dozen times without arriving at an answer. Then it occurred to him that Jean might have some definite reason for not returning to Adare House immediately. The longer he reasoned with himself, the more confident he became that Croisset had been the victor. He knew Jean. Every advantage was on his side. He was as watchful as a lynx. It was impossible to conceive of him walking into a trap. So he determined to wait, at least until that night. It was almost noon when Adare sent word by Metoosin asking Philip to rejoin him in the big room. A little later Josephine and her mother came in. Again Philip noticed that in the face of Adare's wife was that strange look which he had first observed in her room. The colour of the morning had faded from her cheeks. The glow in her eyes was gone. Adare noted the change, and spoke to her tenderly. Miriam and Josephine went ahead of them into the dining room, and with his hand on Philip's arm, John Adare whispered: "Sometimes I'm afraid, Philip. She changes so suddenly. This morning her cheeks and lips were red, her eyes were bright, she laughed, she was the old Miriam. And now, can you tell me what it means? Is it some terrible malady which the doctors could not find?" "No, it is not that." Philip felt his heart beat a little faster. Josephine had fallen a step behind her mother. She had heard Adare's words, and at Philip she flung back a swift, frightened look. "It is not that," he repeated. "See how much better she looks to day than yesterday. You understand, Mon Pere, that oftentimes there comes a period of nervousness, of a sickness that is not sickness, in a woman's life. The winter will build her up." The dinner passed too swiftly for Philip. They sat at a long table, and Josephine was opposite him. For a time he forgot the strain he was under, that he was playing a part in which he must not strike a single false key. Yet in another way he was glad when it came to an end, for it gave him an opportunity of speaking a few words with Josephine. Adare and Miriam went out ahead of them. At the door Philip held Josephine back. "You are not going to leave me alone this afternoon?" he asked. "It is not quite fair or safe, Josephine. I am travelling on thin ice. "You are doing splendidly, Philip," she protested. "To morrow I will be different. Metoosin says there is a little half breed girl very sick 10 miles back in the forest, and you may go with me to visit her. There are reasons why I must be with my mother all of to day. She has had a long journey and is worn out and nervous. Perhaps she will not want to appear at supper. If that is so, I will remain with her. But we will be together to morrow all day. Is that not recompense?" She smiled up into his face as they followed Adare and his wife. "You may help Metoosin with the dogs," she suggested. "I want you to be good friends, you and my beasts." The hours that followed proved to be more than empty ones for Philip. Twice he went to the big room and found that Adare himself had yielded to the exhaustion of the long trip from civilization and was asleep. He accompanied Metoosin to the pit and assisted in chaining the dogs. But Metoosin was taciturn and uncommunicative. Josephine and her mother sent down their excuses at supper time, and he sat alone with Adare, who was delighted when he received word that they had been sleeping most of the afternoon, and would join them a little later. His face clouded, however, when he spoke of Jean. "It is unusual," he said. "Jean is very careful to leave word of his movements. Metoosin says it is possible he went after fresh caribou meat. But that is not so. His rifle is in his room. He left during the night, or he would have spoken to us. I saw him as late as midnight, and he made no mention of it then. It has been snowing for 2 or 3 hours, or I would send.